Before this video starts, if you want more of me, I stream with my buddies on twitch.tv/AJY04 every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. You should be there, otherwise you'll be a loser. Also, at the end of this video, I say that Metroid Prime 3 is going to be the next review, and while that's true for the marathon, it's mostly a lie because it is now October, so I have a Halloween video that is going to take precedent over that, and I want to review Shadow Generations, which is also going to take precedent over Metroid Prime 3. So that video will come, but it will likely be a few videos out. So when you get to the end of the video and I say next up is Metroid Prime 3, that motherfucker's lying. Oh hello, I've looked at a lot of games that I would consider to be painful. Devil May Cry 2, Sonic and the Secret Rings, Crash Bash. But all of them were painful metaphorically speaking. This is the first time that I've played a painful game that was physical. Also, I'm sick. You could probably tell. I got sick again. Who doesn't love the Nintendo DS? While I think it's culturally less relevant than the Wii, don't let that distract you from the fact that it sold way more and was a technical marvel by being a handheld that could do 3D graphics. Even though the PSP was arguably the better of the two, the DS just had more widespread appeal, with games that appealed to a wider audience, games like Brain Age for my grandma and Mario 64 DS for me. Metroid Prime Hunters was one of the big examples Nintendo used when showcasing the DS's ability to do 3D, even including a demo cartridge for the US release of the console. I played my DS a lot as a kid, and obviously I never got into this game because I wasn't into the Metroid series until much later in my life. And thank God for that, because I would have hated this game as a kid. The game was developed by Nintendo Software Technology, as Retro was busy doing something else and couldn't help out with the project. Nintendo opted out of developing the game themselves because they wanted NST's Western influence on the game, and it was 2006, we didn't know how poorly that could turn out yet. NST decided that since the DS had built-in Wi-Fi, a mic, and Prime was a first-person series, they felt like the hardware was telling them to focus on a multiplayer game. This hardware. I'll get this out of the way, I didn't even bother looking at the multiplayer. I highly doubt I could find a match, and I just could not care enough to get a friend for download play. You know what other game focused on multiplayer above the main story, the thing that fans have been buying these games for years? And what about the DS's hardware made you think that multiplayer was just begging to be made? I just don't understand that. Though I will say I like the idea they had to introduce other bounty hunters. It makes sense that for some missions, Samus would be at odds against other hunters after the same bounty. Not that these games really have plots where that would make sense, but I like it here nonetheless. However, this all added up to a game that the moment I was in control of, I wasn't sure I had it in me to beat. Because it didn't take long for me to realize pretty much everything I'd have to say on this game after just 1 hour. The short version is, I feel like this game was made to show that 3D was completely possible on the DS, and that's kind of where the concept ended. But Hunters wasn't actually the first Prime game on the DS. That honor would go to Metroid Prime Pinball. And that name is not just for alliteration's sake. This is a pinball adaptation of Metroid Prime. It has the same enemies, there are artifacts, Talos is here, you can get items and abilities, you wall jump, I don't get it. Why is it so detailed, and why is it fun? I only played one game of it because you can only do so much pinball in one session, but there's something about it that's just... Spoiler alert, if I'm ever going back to one of these games, it's not gonna be Hunters. The Galactic Federation gets a telepathic message telling them about some ultimate power in the Alembic solar system that I can only assume is Project Shadow. So they call up Samus and tell her to go retrieve it, and if that's not possible, then to destroy it. But she's not the only one who picked up on the call, as 6 other bounty hunters would intercept the transmission and head for the system themselves. When Samus arrives in the system, she finds that there are 8 keys called the Octoliths that she has to retrieve and traverses the planets in search of them, fighting off any bounty hunters that get in her way. Along the way, you can find scan logs that explain the backstory of the system, and the scan visor was once again reduced to just blocks, which is a little annoying. There's a bit more color variety, but Prime 2's was so good that this just feels disappointing. And also, the lore is only visible in the scan visor, meaning that if you're just running around not in the scan visor, because it's honestly a little clunky to get out of, so if anything attacks you, you're gonna want to be in combat visor at all times, it makes all the lore way easier to miss. The Olympic race lived on these planets in peace, but because this is a Metroid Prime game, a meteor had to come and fuck shit up. The meteor brought a monster named Goria that mimicked the people and weapons of the system and wiped most of them out. The last survivors of the race turned themselves into telepathic energy somehow, and put the little bastard in a sack, tossed the sack into a river, and hurled the river into space. Specifically, a dimensional rift called the Infinity Void. Once she has all of the octoliths, she and the other hunters go into the Infinity Void where old Gonorrhea is over here waiting. It's what telepathically spoke to the Galactic Federation, hoping to trick them into freeing it. It drains the power of the other hunters because they're not the main character. You have to shoot these panels in order, otherwise Goria will destroy your way back. If you do it right, you're brought to another arena where Samus gets a new power to destroy this thing, and she and the hunters can escape. The story hits all of the beats of a Prime plot. A meteor brought a monster that wiped out a civilization, and in their last efforts they seal it away with keys that Samus has to find so she can run in and start blasting. Though I'll give this game credit over Prime 1 and 2. The octoliths are obviously this game's artifacts and Sky Temple keys, but they're integrated into the main progression. You're not exploring the planet for some other reason only for these to become important at the last second, you're looking for these the entire time. Too bad looking for them isn't really enjoyable.
Because fitting a game made for this into this, it's gonna require some compromise.
Firstly, the game looks rough at times. It can be hard to make things out, see enemies and platforms, and it can be really hard to track the hunters. I get it's impressive for a handheld system, especially in 2006, but there's impressive, and then there's good. But the biggest problem comes from what I said in the intro. This game physically hurts to play for longer than like 20 minutes at a time. There are two control options, buttons and the touchscreen. Being normal, I started out with buttons, and this is so not good. The touchscreen just gives you way more precision, but it doesn't help much with the cramps that this game gave my left hand. For some reason that I can only assume is because of the multiplayer focus, movement in this game has been changed from the GameCube games. Those games had pseudo tank controls, or you could only move forward and backwards unless you were locked on. It was a little looser than, say, Resident Evil, but it was still a bit tanky, and I figured that would likely be the case here to make it a bit easier to control with the lack of an analog stick. But instead, you can finally strafe without locking on, and use the touchscreen for all camera movement. In fact, there's no lock on at all except for the scan visor, unless I just missed it somehow, but it made being precise honestly not that bad. Maybe there's a bit of auto aim, but I didn't really have much trouble hitting my shots. Though it makes it harder to track enemies while keeping on the move and avoiding their attacks, especially with the other hunters. I just hated these fights. What's a bigger issue is the rest of the controls. Firing is on L, switching weapons and Morph Ball are on the touchscreen, which is a compromise you kinda have to put up with. And you jump by double tapping the screen. I don't care how little platforming there is, this is awkward, and once again it makes it hard to evade attacks. Most of the time during fights I just tank damage hoping I can outdamage them, and more often than not that works. The biggest issue is that after playing this game for more than like 20 minutes, my hand starts to hurt a lot. I know I mentioned it before, but I can't stress enough that this holds the game back immensely. The DS was packaged with this game's demo, and the full release was packaged with Tylenol. The areas just also aren't very interesting to explore. Each planet is pretty small, and outside of ammo upgrades, there's not much else to find. You go to a planet, find 3 artifacts, maybe get a new universal weapon, which I didn't really bother experimenting with because the basic beam and missiles did more than enough. Fight a boss, which is probably just a boss you've already fought on a previous planet. Then rush out of the place, maybe fighting a hunter and escaping before time runs out, which, well, the planets don't exactly explode because they're still there. I'm pretty sure you can still travel to them, so I don't know why we were in such a rush. I noticed very early on that I was avoiding this game. I didn't want to play it. It was dull planet after dull planet, and halfway through, I felt like I had experienced everything in this game, especially considering they were already using bosses.
But I kept going, and was it worth it? Honestly, I can't say that it was.
This game succeeds at showing that a 3D first-person game is possible on the DS, but it doesn't prove that it's a good idea. The game looks rough, it's hard to see things on the small screen, has controls that are painful, and it feels like a loose campaign thrown together to validate the game's existence while the real focus was on the multiplayer, and just like God of War Ascension, it resulted in a pretty dull experience.
But at least Ascension had a good story, and its feeling of dullness was not helped by the fact that it was the last game in the original series. Here, there's not much more than it just being a novelty. It was impressive that a Metroid Prime game was possible on this, but in today's day and age where I can play Metroid Prime 1 and a better version at that on a system not that much bigger, there's little reason to play it today.
The only interesting thing about it in 2024 is the fact that Sylux was in the Prime 4 trailer. You can skip out on this one. You're not missing much other than never being able to use your left hand again. It's just not that great of a game.
It may not have been great, but I applaud the attempt. The next real game would be Metroid Prime 3 Corruption on the Wii. The as of now, last game in the Prime series, mainline anyway. So, do things end off on a good note before Prime 4? Let's find out. Until then, I hope you have a great day, a beautiful morning, an awesome night, and I'll see you next mission.